A lion doesn't roar before it strikes. It simply watches, waits, then moves with quiet precision. In a world where everyone's shouting to be seen, the most powerful person is the one who says nothing. No explanations, no defense, no emotional outbursts, just stillness, and a gaze that says, you don't get to move me. Today on the Chill Stoic, we dive into the unshakable force of silence, not as weakness, but as warfare. Because when your enemies can't read you, they start to fear you. Let's begin. Part 1. The power of silence. Fear what you cannot predict. Some people try to dominate with volume, with threats, with theatrics. But real power doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. It enters a room without warning and changes the temperature without a word. The Stoics understood this long before social media or boardrooms ever existed. They knew that noise is the weapon of the insecure, but silence? Silence is the shield of the self-mastered. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. It means calculation, observation, inner control. And that terrifies people who rely on chaos to feel strong. Most of the world is addicted to reaction. Someone insults, they clap back. Someone threatens, they defend. Someone gossips, they retaliate. But when you don't respond, when you don't flinch, you flip the dynamic. Now they don't know what's coming. Now they feel exposed, vulnerable, uneasy. And in that uncertainty, they lose power. As Epictetus wrote, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But what happens when your reaction is nothing? You hold the space. You hold the room. You hold yourself. That silence is not the absence of emotion, it's the control of it. And once you learn to own your reactions, no one else ever will. Part 2. Stillness breaks them. When you don't react, you take back power. They expected a reaction, a flinch, a protest, a defense. But instead, you gave them silence. And at that exact moment, the power shifted. Most people live like emotional puppets. You pull the string, they dance. Insult them, they erupt. Challenge them, they explain. Push them and they'll push back, desperate to be heard, to be validated. But here's the truth. When your enemies can provoke you, they already own you. Not your mind, your peace. And the moment you react, you're telling them they've touched something tender, something vulnerable. You just gave them the blueprint to your buttons. Now imagine something else. You don't flinch, you don't blink, you don't defend, you just breathe. Still, calm, solid like stone. And suddenly, they don't know what's going to happen next. They wanted chaos, you gave them stillness. They wanted control, you gave them confusion. Because when someone attacks and you do not move, they're left alone in their noise, facing themselves. And that's the part that breaks them. It's not your aggression. It's your restraint. It's that quiet voice inside you that says, I've already won, because I'm not playing your game. I once witnessed this in a boardroom. A man, quiet, unassuming, was publicly mocked by a colleague trying to humiliate him. Called irrelevant, called outdated, laughed at his ideas in front of everyone. The room braced for a response. But he didn't argue. He didn't even defend himself. He simply looked at the man and asked, "Are you finished?" Then turned back to his work like nothing happened. No fire, no retaliation, just silence, sharp and dignified. And that silence cut deeper than any words ever could. It said, "You don't get to define me. You don't get to move me. You don't even deserve my reaction." The entire room shifted. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. And the attacker, he shrunk. Because power, real power, doesn't yell. It refuses to be pulled. The man who can't be provoked is untouchable. He's not frozen. He's focused. He's not passive. He's unshakable. And that presence, quiet, grounded, unmoved, becomes the most terrifying presence in the room. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but mastery over emotional disturbance. It's not that you feel nothing, it's that you choose what gets your energy. And foolish attacks? They're not worthy of the man who knows his worth. So next time someone tries to humiliate you, provoke you, test you, try silence. Not out of fear, but out of power. Because when you learn to control your pause, you start to own the battlefield before the first move is even made. Part 3. Energy that commands. Presence is power, even in complete silence. There is a kind of power that doesn't shout. It doesn't stomp into the room. It doesn't demand attention with drama or charm. It simply arrives, and everything changes. That's not charisma. That's not performance. That's presence. And it's more rare and more feared than any loud declaration of strength. The truth is, most people fill rooms with noise, nervous laughter, constant opinions, fast movements. They talk to be validated. They move to be noticed. They need attention like oxygen because without it, they feel invisible. But the Stoic man, he doesn't need to be seen. He needs only to be still, grounded, aware, and somehow that is what makes people notice him most. Because there's something deeply unsettling about someone who doesn't flinch. Someone who doesn't over-explain, doesn't chase approval, doesn't fight to belong. Instead, he listens. And when he speaks, even briefly, the entire room listens back. I knew someone like that once. His name was Aurelius. Not tall, not flashy, not loud. He rarely smiled, but when he entered a room, people sat straighter. He didn't try to dominate, yet space opened for him. He walked slowly, spoke only when needed, held eye contact just long enough to shift people in their chairs. Even when he said nothing, it felt like something had just been said, because his stillness had weight. His silence had precision. His presence had gravity. He worked in a high-stakes world filled with egos and noise. Meetings often became verbal battlegrounds, everyone trying to outwit, out-talk, outperform. But Aurelius waited. Let them exhaust their energy. Let them burn out in noise. Then, one sentence. Sometimes just a question, sometimes just a statement, but always exact, always sharp. And suddenly, the room went from chaos to focus. Because he wasn't just speaking. He was cutting through. And everyone felt it. That's what silence does when it's backed by intention. It doesn't just quiet others, it awakens them. It doesn't demand respect, it evokes it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Aurelius embodied that. He didn't stoop to the noise. He didn't try to outplay the egotists. He just stayed rooted in self-respect, in clarity, in restraint. And in that restraint, he became unshakable. The less he said, the more others wondered. The more he paused, the more others panicked. People began to fear his silence, not because it was cold, but because it was unreadable. It meant he was watching. It meant he was thinking. It meant he was choosing, not reacting. And that made the loudest voices in the room quiet themselves, not out of obedience, but out of instinct. Because deep down, we all sense when we're in the presence of power. Not power that demands, but power that doesn't need to. So if you want to become that kind of force, don't perform. Don't try to be impressive. Instead, become grounded. So grounded that the room shifts to meet your pace, not the other way around. Stillness is not the absence of energy. It's energy under control. And when you master that, you don't just enter the room, you own it without saying a word. Part 4. Don't react. Don't explain. Sometimes the loudest statement is saying nothing at all. There's a moment when someone insults you, questions your worth, tries to tear you down in front of others, that your instinct screams, "Fight back." Your ego whispers, "Prove them wrong, show your strength." But here's the paradox. The moment you explain, you lose power. Because explanations, no matter how intelligent, are a form of justification. And when you justify, you imply that their opinion matters. When you argue, you confirm they touched a nerve. And when you react emotionally, you hand over your peace. But silence? Silence is a verdict. It's not weakness, it's control. And control terrifies the chaotic. I once knew a woman named Clara. She worked in a corporate environment poisoned by gossip and passive aggression. In that world, loudness was currency and cruelty was masked as humor. There was one co-worker in particular, petty, bitter, driven by jealousy. She didn't attack directly. She weaponized sarcasm, backhanded compliments in meetings, whispers loud enough to wound but quiet enough to deny. But Clara, she never bit the bait. She didn't flinch, didn't explain, didn't fire back. She simply smiled, took her notes, and focused on the work. And every room she walked into, she walked out with the same calm she brought in. No drama, no defense, no reaction. Only presence. Over time, the attacker got louder, more desperate. Her jabs more obvious, more reckless. But the louder she became, the smaller she appeared. Because when you keep punching at a wall that doesn't move, you don't look powerful. You look ridiculous, and everyone sees it. Clara didn't have to expose her enemy. She let the enemy expose herself. She didn't escalate the war. She made her silence the battlefield, and won without lifting a sword. Epictetus once wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you, instead of defending yourself, say, 'He obviously doesn't know me very well.'" Not as sarcasm, as liberation. When you don't explain yourself, you communicate something deeper. "I don't need your understanding. I have mine." And that is terrifying to people who feed on attention and emotional control. Because most people don't insult to be honest, they insult to provoke. They want to see if they can bend your peace. They want to feel strong by making you small. But when you don't respond, the insult turns inward, begins to echo inside their mind, not yours. And that echo is often louder than any comeback you could have given. Not because you ignored them, but because you saw through them and still chose silence. Here's what Stoicism teaches. Let fools reveal themselves. Let their words fall flat against your stillness. Let their attacks crumble under the weight of their own insecurity. Because silence isn't passive, it's disciplined attachment. It says, "You're not worth my peace, not worth my balance, not worth my truth." So next time someone tries to bait you, don't bite. Don't defend, don't react. Let your calm be the thing they can't shatter. And let your silence say everything they were never ready to hear. Part 5. Be unreadable. The less they know, the more they fear. People don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't predict. And in a world obsessed with labels, definitions, and clarity, the most powerful person is the one who can't be pinned down. See, control begins with information. Your fears, your habits, your goals, your insecurities, all of it becomes leverage in the wrong hands. That's why the more you speak, the more you explain, the easier you are to manipulate. But when you hold back, when you reveal less, you take away the tools they need to move you. There's a reason the Stoics didn't overshare. They didn't walk into rooms announcing their intentions. They didn't tell everyone what they felt, feared, or hoped. They understood what's hidden is protected. Seneca once said, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." Because sometimes, silence is not just wisdom, it's armor. And when worn well, that armor becomes impenetrable. Not because you're hiding, but because you're choosing what deserves access to your mind. I once knew a man named Caleb. Soft-spoken, calm, never overshared. People would ask him questions, dig for details, try to connect, but he'd smile, deflect lightly, and pivot the conversation elsewhere. Not out of coldness, but out of clarity. He knew that mystery is protection. Some thought he was aloof. Others called him mysterious. But over time, they all began to respect him, even those who couldn't understand him, because they had nothing to use against him. They didn't know what made him angry, what made him anxious, what motivated or wounded him. And that meant they had no levers to pull, no weak spots to exploit. Then came the pressure. Rumors flew, drama unfolded. And while others crumbled or exploded, Caleb stayed still, untouchable. He moved like a shadow, precise, focused, unfazed. And the reason people feared him wasn't because he threatened anyone. It's because no one knew what he was capable of. His unreadability was the threat. That's what true presence creates. You don't have to speak. You don't have to defend. You just are, and that's enough. So, how do you cultivate that kind of power? You stop narrating your life. Stop announcing your next move. Stop handing out blueprints to people who haven't earned your trust. Let them guess. Let them assume. Let them be wrong. Because the man who keeps something to himself isn't hiding weakness, he's preserving strength. Don't be cold, be clear. Don't be loud, be deliberate. And don't be easy to read, be impossible to play. Because the person who can't be figured out becomes the person no one wants to challenge. In a world addicted to transparency, where people live out loud and give away their every thought, you become powerful not by sharing more, but by choosing what not to share. And when you finally learn to protect your peace with silence, you don't just become unreadable, you become unstoppable. Part 6. Do in silence. Let your absence be a warning. Let your work be the message. We live in an era of constant announcements. People talk about their next move before they make it. They broadcast their hustle, their goals, their plans, hoping the world will applaud their intentions. But here's the Stoic truth. Intent means nothing without execution. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. And the more predictable you are, the easier you are to block, stop, manipulate, or discredit. But the one who moves in silence becomes a storm no one sees coming. By the time they notice you, it's already too late. Stoicism never glorified noise. The great Stoics didn't speak to impress. They acted without announcement. And their legacy wasn't built on volume. It was built on quiet, ruthless discipline. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, do the work, let others talk, let others predict, let others waste energy. You build in silence, move with precision, let your results interrupt the room. I once knew a woman named Samira, brilliant, focused, but nearly invisible. While others in her firm competed to be seen, talking about projects, promotions, and their next big move, Samira kept her head down and simply executed. She didn't advertise. She didn't compete for attention. She let her work speak, and it did, loudly, when it mattered most. Her system saved the company millions. And by the time people realized what she had built, she was already gone, promoted, transferred, elevated to a level they never saw coming. Because while they were talking, she was building. That's the weapon of silent action. It creates impact without warning. It leaves others stunned, not because you didn't signal your success, but because they didn't take you seriously until it was too late. And that's the most dangerous kind of presence. So if you want to create fear, not through intimidation, but through unpredictability, then shut the door. Do the work. Disappear into your craft and reappear with results. Outwarn them. Don't foreshadow your greatness. Let your silence be your strategy. Let your outcome be your announcement. Because when your success comes without warning, when your evolution doesn't need permission, when your rise doesn't need applause, you no longer chase power, you become it. And what they fear isn't what you said you'd do. It's what you might do next. Because silence holds possibility. And possibility is power. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't beg to be understood, yet you shifted the room. In a world addicted to noise, silence becomes a threat. Not because it's loud, but because it's unreadable. Not because it demands respect, but because it doesn't need it. And that's what makes it so powerful. You didn't explain. You didn't overperform. You didn't reveal every corner of your soul to gain acceptance. You simply stood still and let your self-mastery speak for itself. The truth is, most people live on the surface, chasing applause, seeking permission, performing identity. But you chose something deeper. You chose stillness, focus, intention. And that choice makes you unforgettable. Let others explain themselves. Let others chase the noise. You don't need to be understood to be effective. You don't need to be loud to be heard. Because the most feared man in the room is not the one who speaks with force. It's the one who doesn't need to. The one whose presence whispers, "You can't move me." So walk forward with silence. Let your boundaries echo in how you carry yourself. Let your discipline shape your legacy. And let your enemies try to guess, while you quietly become everything they could never stop. And when they finally realize who you are, you'll already be gone, quiet, focused, and completely untouchable. If this spoke to a deeper part of you, if you felt something shift inside, you don't need to explain it, just live it. Subscribe to the Chill Stoic. Not because we asked, but because you're ready to stop being predictable and start being powerful.